None of
Check the
that.
schedule. Is there any?
There you go. We can
They
see
caught you.
Oh,
It
okay.
doesn't look like there's any.
Okay, we're ready.
Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Joshua Solomon, and with me as always is the Honorable J.P. Marzullo. How you doing, Jay?
You changed my name to
JP?
J. My last
I'm
name is
sorry.
in P,
Oh,
by
I'm
the
sorry.
way.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm starting to be
I'm-
just like Gary.
I know you
Gary
are.
would just forget things and make stuff up, and I'm doing the same
Yeah,
thing.
well, we
I'm not
need
doing it
his
on
humor
purpose,
here.
though.
Oh, you're- So I was going to start calling you King Solomon after I
Yeah,
saw
don't
that
be
great
doing
picture of you with the crown on. That was
Don't
really
be
cool.
doing that.
That was fun. And the other thing is, this is why you never, ever put all your winter clothes away if you live in New Hampshire.
It's been incredibly cold, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Like it got warm. I was like, okay, I might bring my motorcycle out. Nope, not doing it. We have returning guests. We have
State Senator
Howard
Pearl.
and Heather Pearl.
You are having trouble
I was
tonight.
like, it starts with an H. It starts with an H. I know it does.
You need me to prompt you.
You know, this is just,
They both do.
Yeah, we're both HP. You,
You
can't
know-
go wrong.
there you go. No, the funny thing is, our show last week, we could not remember last names. So we were like, all of us, including our guest, whoever that was, who was our
Yeah.
guest last week. So we're right back to where we started from last week. We thought maybe we'd just make a cheat sheet out. You know, maybe that's our next step. Or we'll just make it
insane.
the senior hour and people will
Yep.
understand a little bit better, right?
We're getting there.
Well, that's good. I can't remember bill numbers either, so we'll do good.
We don't want bill numbers. We want names. That's, you know, it always cracked me up when I was in the State House. People would say, well, what's the bill number? And I'd say, I don't know, what are you talking about? Bill number? Tell me what the, you know, tell me what it
They
is.
wanna
There's
look
just-
it
What the
up.
topic is.
Yeah, you can type the topic in, however, you know. Anyway, so welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Always
to have
enjoy it.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So what's going on in the Senate now that we ought to be talking about? We had an interesting conversation before the show about PFAS bills and about
Yes.
what I really liked. I'd like you to repeat what you said about the analogy between farming. I love this, by the way, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Between farming and being in the, you know, the State House in any, whatever capacity, right?
Sure.
I thought that's really cool.
Sure. So, I mean, it's an easy question to ask and a hard one to answer. But we've just gone through crossover, so we're in the Senate are now hearing all of the House bills, and all of our Senate bills have now gone to the House. So we're splitting up our time being over there, introducing our own bills, as well as holding hearings within our committees. And so it's a
So that's crossover.
busy day. Yeah,
Yep.
it's a busy time.
So how many bills were sent to you and how many went the other way? Do you remember?
I believe the number was around 360 that came from the House. I may be off a little bit on that, but north of 300. How's that?
Wow.
And I don't know the count that went over to them. Probably not over 200.
Okay.
You know, the second half of the session is certainly easier for the House than it is for the Senate because they send us more bills than we send them.
So that seems like a much lower number than we've had in the last couple of years.
Actually, this is one of the highest numbers of bills coming from the House in many years.
No, didn't we have like over 1,000?
Well, yeah,
Like,
but the House.
1,000 bills filed, but
Yeah.
what actually makes it through the process to get to crossover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We did have
We're
over
still in
1,000.
the 600 range, 700, well, 500-600 range.
This year,
right now.
we had over 1,100.
No, I mean as far as what's still
Oh, yes.
in progress.
Yes, and the other thing is we had an unprecedented amount of retained bills that came out of the first year of the session that came over to 255 between the House and Senate.
Wow, that's a
And
lot.
About 50, right around 50 in the Senate and about 200 in the House. So in addition to the 360 plus that the Senate filed, we had the 200 retained bills as well. So we did about 500 plus bills in the first half, and we'll have over 300 in the second half.
So why do you think there were that many retained? Is it because the split in the House now, the demographics of the people there, or what would you? what do
That
you
probably
think?
was a reason for a lot of retained bills last year.
Okay.
Because it was easier for them to hold on and get through, because they've had a record amount of no recommendation bills
Yep.
going to the floor. And for those who don't know what that is, when the committee looks at a bill and hears it, then they come out with a recommendation for the whole body to consider. And if they come out at a tie, then it comes out with no recommendation, which the first motion they go to is ought to pass. And so they've had a lot of bills come out with no recommendation. The other thing that has been at a higher level than at least in recent history and maybe in the history of the House is the amount of times that the Speaker has voted.
Really?
Yeah, the Speaker only votes if he wants to or when there's a tie to break, to make or break a tie. And he has voted very regularly.
Yeah, I don't remember the Speaker we had. He's running again, I think.
Well, sure. You're probably
no,
a Speaker
Sherman.
Packer.
No, the Democrat that we had.
Oh,
Shurtleff.
Shurtleff, Speaker Shurtleff.
Yeah,
That's right. You were in the minority year. I forget.
Yeah, I was
that.
in the
Yes.
minority year, the fun year. But he didn't vote that often,
No.
if I remember. Once or twice, I think he had a vote, but otherwise he pretty much stayed out of it.
I think
which
when
is-
we had Sherman, I think he
We did have
actually
Sherman,
said that he set the record for the number of tiebreakers.
Yeah,
in the
I
House.
believe he has.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, but yeah, so to answer the rest of your question, we were talking earlier about many of the different bills that are going through. This is a week we don't have a Senate session, so we have hearing sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for the 3 committees that I serve on. And just in my 3 committees, we'll hear probably 40 plus bills in those 3 days. It's crazy.
That is crazy.
There's a lot of bills.
Yeah, I remember when we just had that, when I came to testify with the dog bill, smushed in faces, they tried to stop the breeding of it.
The
And you
brachyophilia.
came, thank
Yes.
you for coming. And so you had to go there, and then you had to go to a finance committee, and it's like, it's incredible.
I don't testify a lot in the House on House bills, but sometimes there's one that if I feel it's something I want to get in and weigh in with my opinion, I will. We certainly have the option to. But yeah, it's been busy. It's been real busy.
So let's talk about, I really do want you to talk about the analogy between farming. You thought you were going to get away with that. That's called, exactly.
I just hadn't gotten there.
Okay, well, all right, then I'm not going to let it drop. So if you
That's
want
okay.
to talk about the PFAS bill stuff first, that might be more interesting.
Sure. So we've had, I heard a bill, I am the Vice Chair of Energy and Natural Resources, and yesterday we had a bill pertaining to banning all PFAS by the year 2027. There are a handful of exceptions with medical technology. But
Seems pretty quick.
it is, not offering for sale. The manufacturers could not offer for sale in New Hampshire any products with intentionally added PFAS. And
so why don't you tell the viewers what PFAS is? Because I think that's
we're hearing
important.
about it a lot. So these are a series of chemical components that were put together. PFAS, PFOS. There's other ones, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it because the name is about 27 letters long, and I will butcher it. Excuse me. But essentially, it's things like Teflon, your nonstick pans, your Stainmaster carpets, any fabrics that have a Stainmaster quality to them, those would have a PFAS product on them, most likely, at least in recent years. It's used in medical areas as well, and Heather and I were talking about that earlier. Heather's an LNA, and I said, the catheters that she used, there's some coatings on those. There is it's far more prevalent in our life than you realize. Coatings on food containers to keep the food from sticking to them. It's in a lot of places. And, certainly we've seen, firefighting equipment is another one.
Yep.
I'll mention that because that interacts with the second bill that I heard today.
Can it be one of the exceptions?
It can be. I don't remember all of the exceptions that were in the bill, but I remember it was around medical products that essentially was the biggest one. And that was one of the areas of concern because it was banning it in PPE, personal protective equipment, which could bring in fired equipment too. So that would pertain to the second bill that I heard today, which I chair Executive Departments and Administration, and that bill was talking about the banning of certain chemical compositions in firefighting equipment because, as many of us are aware, and if you're not, there's a very prevalent cancer situation that's going on among firefighters. And some of it certainly is related to their gear, and some of it is related to the environmental hazards that they deal with, perhaps during a fire.
So
When I went through firefighting training, the big thing at that time, it was the early 90s, was phasing out a particular type of firefighting foam. And because that was, and so...
And that had PFAS in it.
Yeah.
And that's why they were doing it.
We were getting rid of it, and
Yep.
in the act of getting rid of it, it seemed kind of counterproductive, is that this stockpile of foam we were using in training situations. So we were actually using more of it to get rid of it.
Yes.
But we were exposed to it more than we would have been if we were using it for just fires. So, but yeah,
Yes.
I guess what I'm getting at is banning these things that you're saying 3 years, banning it completely in New Hampshire, but you just listed off a whole bunch of places. That is a very hard thing to do. That's like telling the country to get rid of electric or gas cars for electric in 5 years. That seems very aggressive.
And it may be, and that's something we're looking at. We took testimony from Business and Industry Association and the retailers about how it would impact them as well, and certainly that's a consideration that we'll make because, we certainly, consumer product safety is a big thing for us. We all want that, but we also have to understand that sometimes we have to phase into these things. And it may take time for the industry, the manufacturing industry, to catch up with alternative products to replace them. And 3 years may be too aggressive. That's something we're looking at, certainly.
So didn't this first come to light with St. Gobain's in Merrimack, or was it being kind of highlighted before that? Because that's the first time I'd ever heard of it, I think.
Sure. So St. Gobain was probably one of the most high-profile cases in New Hampshire.
Why. Okay.
Yes, and that was to do with airborne particulate that was being emitted from their plant, and unfortunately, it spread into the surrounding
Water systems.
and into the groundwater systems, and it's really a problem, especially around the Merrimack area. Mm-hmm. That was one of the harder hit communities, and so, we established some groundwater standards. I'm trying to remember. I think it was 2019, but I may be off a year on that. But that was in place so that we could work. And St. Gobain has, at least to my knowledge, has done a pretty good job about taking that responsibility for something that came out of their plant and providing drinking water and certainly working with cleanup programs. But that was probably the more high-profile case. Certainly, the PFAS problem has been being highlighted nationally. Probably that, maybe even earlier than that. At least there's been some movement towards it. We've had several PFAS bills in the 8 years that I have been there in the legislature, 6 in the House and 2 in the Senate. And we've seen different ones that have come along. And it's interesting to watch how it all plays through, and it's sometimes challenging to make the right decision for public policy, because we do have to balance the things that you spoke about too, product availability and consumer protection.
Yeah, like I said, you just listed a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in the whole, I don't think we kind of said it. I mean, we've said it before, but PFAS these particles are permanent. They don't leave the environment. They don't leave your body. They build up, and that's really the issue, is that you can't get rid of them.
Well, they are called a forever chemical.
Right.
And they certainly have a very long life.
And when you talk about things like Stainmaster rugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about things that are in a large percentage of houses
Yes.
and homes here in New Hampshire. So, step one is banning the new products. Okay, so now we've got this. You've got to replace the product on the market with something, but then what about getting rid of these things?
Well,
is there an environmental thing?
Yes.
Because we just take things to the dump.
Yep.
Right, and there's a list of things that you've got to separate at the dump already, but are we going to be adding to that list here that we need to handle these things and get rid of them? Like
Differently, yeah.
somebody
They're gonna
gets
have
rid
to
of their
handle them
rug, is it going to be like batteries? You can't throw the batteries over here. You can't throw the plastic over here. What are we doing with these rugs or these other products with PFAS in it? Are we?
So I'll put on my other hat.
We have that EPA situation with
Yes.
just disposing of things that already are in place.
Hey, listen, it's a great conversation that is occurring. I also serve on the solid waste working group, which is discussing a lot of these things and managing, our landfills and landfill policies and, recycling policies and how we look at that, because we do get a lot of, we're in New Hampshire, we have a pretty good landfills. They're pretty solid. They've done a good job in constructing them, and so we're not having major issues with leaking in most of them, especially the newer ones. But they are collecting a lot of effluent that's coming out of these that is containing PFAS, and they're having to treat it. And that can be a challenge. So, as we look at, eliminating PFAS into the products that are going in, you've touched on the other subject. It's going to be many years before all these old sofas, all the old carpets, all the old Teflon pans, all of these things before they are out of the cycle of, goods that are going into the recycling or landfills. So we do have to look at that.
We stopped putting lead in paint something like 45, 50 years ago.
Yep.
But there are still houses that
still have it.
lead paint in them.
Absolutely.
We're still dealing with it 50 years later.
Yep. It will be a long time before this isn't, I don't know when that will be on the horizon. I can just say it'll probably be more than any of our lifetimes before these products are out of circulation within the community. So you wanted me to circle back onto my analogy. I hadn't forgotten you, JP. I really hadn't.
No, I just found it very interesting because I've also, I've watched you in the State House and how you handle things very calmly and patiently, and I think it has a lot to do with your livelihood and how you grew up farming, and I just thought when you mentioned it was spot on, by the way.
Sure. Well, for those of you viewers who don't know, my day job is I'm in the field of agriculture. My wife and I own a produce farm, Pearl & Sons Farm in Loudon, and we are a wholesale grower for Hannaford and some other supermarkets, as well as we do a small amount of retail, especially with maple syrup at the farm. And I made the analogy to you, JP, that there's a lot of corresponding things between being a legislator and being a farmer.
Right.
As a farmer, we plant a seed, then we cultivate and fertilize it, and then when the time is right, we harvest. And it takes a lot of patience between 1 and 3, doing all of number 2 to get there. And the same is true of legislating. When you file a bill, you're planting a seed. And as you're working through the committee work and discussing with the other members of the House or the Senate and in the governor's office, you're doing that cultivating and fertilizing of that topic. And then when the time is right, you harvest. Or you hopefully get a bill that makes it through the whole process and gets signed into law.
There you go.
And so, the patience that it takes to grow a crop and the investment of time and resources, whether albeit financial or your own, sweat
time,
equity.
right.
Yeah, it takes, a lot of those similar things to get a bill through the legislature.
Yeah, I maybe made some light of that, but I really do believe it. I mean, I think if you're new, especially if you're new in the State House, you're kind of looking for mentors and. Unfortunately, Gary was my mentor, so that was a little scary. But but seriously though, I really do think it's important, and I think that's where we need to work harder at that. It's just like I got a call the other day. They're trying to plant seeds by getting new state reps in.
Yes.
And I suggested that they start looking at the town elections and who's in those positions, because the Democrats do a really good job of that. They kind of get these people into the public, public view, if you will, and they start there, and then they take the best of the brightest of that group, or the craziest of that group, and they move them into the State House, and they're really good at that. And we don't really do much of that. I don't see it anyway, unless it's changed over the last 6 years. But I've not seen that.
Well, recruiting is certainly a topic that we always are working on. It's a work in progress, and One of the things that I certainly stress when I have new people that are coming to me, candidate, or they want to be candidates and they're considering it, is I said, the most important thing that you have to have is your family. That support, because I couldn't do this if my wife didn't support me and my family didn't support me and my friends and my employees, because it takes a lot of time, especially at the Senate level.
Yeah, it takes more time at the Senate.
It does. It's a bit more of a process. But if Heather wasn't behind me, I wouldn't do this anymore. I couldn't.
Right.
Because it takes her love and her patience for me to be able to do what I do, and because it does take time away from our family and from my job.
Yeah, that's very valid. I mean, you can't possibly have this work if one of the two isn't supporting you. I mean, we had Sharon Boldock on last week. That's who it was. So,
she certainly was put through the fire.
So we we had her on because it felt that people don't know what the spouse of a military person goes through, whether it's a male or a female spouse, and how hard it is. Like, she raised all the boys, and she said Don would come home, before he got deployed again, and he would buy them ice cream and candy and go out and play with them and stuff, and she'd say, "Oh no, these are my rules, not yours." You've got to live by these rules because I'm here all the time. You're going to be off and running soon. So that's a great point.
Well, it's an important one because it does impede upon your personal time and your family time. And
but also time on the farm, because he's at the State House all day, and then he'll come home and because he has to get stuff done on the farm, because that's our livelihood. That's how we get our income.
Yeah.
So it takes away from that. So then I'm trying to make up for that other part.
Yeah.
Because he does work a lot at the State House. It's not. He tells me it's only 3-4 days a week. No, it's 5 to 6 days that he's at the State House, or he's doing doing a committee, or he's at a GOP meeting.
Right.
And that's like 6-7 days a week. So when I have my time off, because I do work 12 hours.
Well,
I work 12-hour shifts.
Right.
And I work 3 to 4 12-hour shifts, and plus working at the wellness center in between. But I mean, we both work really, really hard, but.
And she's selling herself short.
Well, I know that you're up really early in the morning, and I'm sure you are too.
Oh, yes.
But you're up really early in the morning, and you get what most people consider a full day's work before you go to work at the State House or before you go go at the hospital. So it's
we have to manage our time wisely.
Yeah.
It's important to do that. I mean, Heather, when she's on at the hospital, is gone at least 13 hours before she's back again. And so that sometimes requires, with the children, they need to get to school, and other things need to get done around the farm, and I don't know, we figure it out. We find a balance.
We do.
A way to get it all done, and sometimes it's her schedule bending a little, and sometimes it's mine.
Yeah. I couldn't have asked for a better teammate.
Same.
It's a great team.
I would say.
It is, yeah.
She's an amazing partner.
Aww. You're too kind.
No, that's true, though. I mean, I think you have to have that kind of a relationship with your spouse to be able to do that. And sometimes people forget that.
Yeah.
And the thing that, you look at Facebook, people, going after people and stuff, and I think, have you ever run for office before?
Right.
Do you know what it takes? And how hard it is, and
So before, when I worked at another facility, they were like, "Heather, why are you still working?" I'm like, "Do you know how much they work at the State House? Do you for
$100
for
$100 a year?
Yeah, exactly.
Even less." With
because
all
by
their
the time
travel times, expenses, and
exactly.
Yeah, and it is truly the citizens.
It's a citizen legislature.
Yeah, it is.
And it's very personally rewarding.
It is. I agree.
We've talked about this $100 a year business
Many.
multiple times.
Yeah, we have. or 125 if you're,
If you're the Speaker or the
Speaker.
Senate
Oh,
President.
and the senators get the same amount of money you do in the House. So,
So
Correct.
does the legislature have the ability, like Congress does, to vote themselves a raise? Like you could vote yourself a just double your salary.
I would love to do that
$200
for myself.
Right?
Essentially, yes, you could.
let's double it, right?
So the short answer to your question is
If you
yes, we
double it,
could.
I mean, you can give yourself a little bit more benefit, maybe pay for those license
Hey, but
plates,
listen, you get a toll thing, so you don't have to pay for your tolls if you're even riding down that way.
Right. So essentially, yes, you can.
No,
We could
yeah.
do that, but let me tell you why I don't think it's a good idea and why I wouldn't support it. Right now, we have 424 members of the House and the Senate that are there for all the right reasons.
Yep.
They're not there for the money.
Oh, yeah.
They are there to do the people's work and to represent what they feel is the best policy for New Hampshire to move forward. And it's, I would hate to, in a way, to see that change. There's a lot of conversation about, you get more qualified people and, because if you paid more, and I don't know, I
don't
would
think so.
challenge that.
I
I think we
would-
have a very diverse and great group of people that are
agree.
there serving.
I think I've said it many times that I like the system because it ensures that the people that are there are people who want to be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would fight you if you were going to vote yourself a full-time salary type raise. But if you were going to do a doubling and make it $200 a year, I would be all for that just for the comedic factor.
So do you know why we get $100 a year? Do you know the history of that?
I don't.
Actually, so back in the 1800s, the legislature was considering, looking. It was the last time they made a pay change, and what they looked at was they were meeting biannually then, every other year, and they looked at what the average salary of a farmer was, and it was $200 a year. And they said, well, since they're meeting every other year, they're only working half the amount of time. We'll give them $100 a year.
Nice.
And that's
So
where
we
that
blame it on the farmers
go.
now.
Just like the time change, it's all the farmers'
The
fault.
interesting part is farmers are still making $100 a year. If we're lucky.
I've heard people say, it's only for people who are retired or very wealthy people that young people can't be there. But I disagree with that because
We see some
you
young
can
people in there. Some
Well, you
very
can,
good young
if you're
people.
going to school, whether it
It's
be a
time
tech
management,
school or
yeah.
whatever, you can set your schedule around what's going on at the State House in some ways, not all the time, but I would encourage younger people to run, especially.
It's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we have some now, not that many, but we do have some, and the very wealthy people, I don't know.
I
So-
believe we have at least 3 members of the Senate that are in their 30s.
Yeah, there you go.
And we have some House members I know that
Or younger than that.
around 20 to 21,
Yep.
and it's certainly in their early 20s. So
Yep.
it's great to have that perspective, and those voices need to be heard too. It's important because they're our future, and they look at the issues a bit differently, perhaps, than people that, once you get to be my age or even older. We have, a couple of members of the Senate that are above 80.
Yeah.
And they certainly bring the historical knowledge and
Yeah, and I
a
think
lot
you
of
need-
great working knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really need that, that age gap sort of, because
Diversity,
then you have mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you get rid of them, then you have nobody to look to say, okay, well, what happened when? Or why did this bill, why was it ITL? I
End
mean,
up repeating mistakes that you don't have to repeat.
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to relook at the same issue many times
Yeah.
because, again, that's the patience that I talked about, the cultivating and the fertilizing, because many bills that pass and become law do not do so the first time they're introduced.
Sure.
I would say that, I'm going out on a limb here, but I would say probably the majority of them aren't.
I would agree.
Other than maybe some technical fixes. A lot of things that I put in this year were technical fixes to things
all
we
said
had
it
changed
just-
last year. So, maybe those get through. But as far as the really impactful ideas that are, changing public policy, very rare that they get through in the first pass.
Yeah, I mean, the people that used to write our bills, would go over them for us, the legislative office.
Office of Legislative Services.
Yeah, I can remember asking about a bill that I was interested in presenting, and they went back and they said, this has been turned down 3 times. So unless you can find something that would change people's attitudes with the bill, I don't even remember what the bill is anymore, but
Sure.
you may not want to spend that time doing that. You might want to look at something else to do. So that, and that's the other thing people don't realize. We don't have, none of us were sitting there with, computers that the state gave us, our secretary. I think the senators do have or share a secretary, correct?
Legislative aid, yes.
Yeah, so you still have that, and thank God, because there's only 24 of you, and but
Sure.
that's not available to us, but that's okay. I mean, that's all right.
So
We
our
have to-
legislative aid serves 2 senators,
Yep.
as well as they are the aid for a committee, at least one committee. So
Yes,
their
right.
time is pretty busy too.
Yeah,
But they are, listen, they're great. I couldn't do it
I
without
agree.
them.
Yeah,
Really couldn't.
we're fortunate to have those people.
Yes.
there.
You're talking about diversity earlier, about recognizing things.
Right.
There's a lot of things that I have done that Howard recognized, and it has come across his lap, or across his table. Like Heather, he would ask me questions about certain things, and it's been pretty.
Well, that's important to do.
too.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's important
Yes.
to, if you have somebody that's an expert in a certain field,
Yeah.
and they happen to be your spouse, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to do that.
I happen to live with a subject matter expert for a lot of the areas that I
So
oversee.
I'll give you
within my
an idea.
legislative
Planned
duties.
Parenthood says that they, they do breast screening and stuff. Okay, I mean they've said that. So Donna was a mammography technologist and has written papers on it and everything like that. And she said the law doesn't provide an average person to do that. It has to be a registered technologist in mammography. So when they were playing that up, I mean, self-testing is a whole other thing, but when they were talking about X-ray, we would screen all those people, that's a lot of garbage. Unless they have a piece of equipment that the state authorizes, that they send a bioengineer in to check to make sure the dosages are right, and you have a registered technologist for mammography, they're not telling us the truth there. But that's one of their things that they discuss all the time. But anyway, to your point, it's good to have that person that can say, you know what, Howard, that's not going to work. Or you know what, Howard, maybe you should think about this, so I think that's important.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it-
sometimes if she's not able to attend a hearing, we'll pull them back up on YouTube, and I'll let her watch the hearing. They're recorded, and say, well, what do you think about this? Here's
Nice.
what we heard. Or
Yep.
Yeah.
or sometimes I can put it in the Reader's Digest for her, just so that she can say, listen, this is what I heard. This is where the challenge is that I see. What are your thoughts? And,
Yeah.
and she gives me real life working experience and knowledge, and it's just really helpful. And that, again, goes back to the question we were just talking about the equality of our legislators. And I think they're very representative of our communities and of our, and of our life here in New Hampshire, of everyday life.
I mean, that's the good news and the bad news that there's 400, because the
Right.
bad news is you represent, when I was in, it was like 3,700 people as a state rep, right? So they see you at the grocery store, at church, at ball games.
Correct.
And they don't care. They're not embarrassed coming up to you and telling you what's wrong with what you did, or telling you they're happy with what you did. So, I mean, I think
Mostly the
that's
first.
Exactly. Yeah,
happens a lot.
I would have done this differently, and I said, well, you
Right.
should run next time then, because so I think. But you're right. I think that's what's the benefit here.
But he's so open to listen.
Yeah.
And even if you're, it could be wrong, or he looks at it a different way.
Sure.
Well, listen, we
So
all
it's
learn
just-
from people with contrary opinions.
Absolutely.
And I only see things the way that I see them, and most of that is, my path in life, the experiences that I've had. And I enjoy learning and understanding why someone has a different viewpoint. Because,
Certainly.
excuse me, I may feel that my viewpoint is correct from my perspective, but it may not be correct from someone else's perspective.
Yeah, and I wish more people would do that, Howard.
Yeah.
I mean,
You just learn a lot by
yeah,
listening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Josh. You ready to ask a question?
No.
It looks like it.
It looked like it to me.
I'm
He's
learning.
thinking this
Yes.
thing. He's listening. He's learning. He's learning. Yeah.
well,
So
being in the Senate, you know, our constituency is significantly larger than
Sure.
it being a House member.
Yeah.
There are some floaterial House seats that have a larger constituency, but essentially every senator represents about 55,000
yeah.
people. And
I remember when I ran for Senate seat 8, which is Ruth's
Yes.
seat, I had 29 towns.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't possibly, you try to, but you're working, like you said, you're working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week easily
Yeah.
to try to get to everybody.
I think that would be almost harder than running some kind of a national campaign or even congressional Senate or rep campaign, because you don't have the media behind you,
No.
right?
Right.
So you literally have to go to all 29 towns
Yep.
multiple times
Sure.
in order to have town hall meetings and
Yep.
meet people and get your name out there. Whereas someone who's running a campaign on a national schedule, even if it's, like a presidential campaign, but even a senatorial campaign or whatnot, you've got the media behind you, you've got the RNC behind you, and folks are pumping out pamphlets that you don't even know about. And
Sure.
that happens to some extent. I mean, you've said it before that folks, that somebody's come to you with a flyer that wasn't yours, it was
Right.
some organization that printed it without your knowledge.
Yeah.
But just the idea that 29 towns, and to do a campaign like that and then canvass it with signs, I mean, how
Yeah,
many
and-
towns do you represent?
so my Senate district is 12 towns, and it's significant enough.
Yeah.
It,
I
it
mean,
really
But they're
is.
large towns. I mean, they're more significant towns.
They're primarily
you have-
around 6,000 residents, probably.
Loudon, you have Tilton.
So
or-
I go from Northfield to Nottingham, essentially,
Northfield,
down the
okay.
east side of
Gotcha.
Concord. But there are 12 communities. I do not have Tilton, but I have Northfield, Canterbury, Loudon, Barnstead,
Yep.
that area. But it's a challenge. The Senate, we have a little bit more fundraising resources that we have to do in order to run a campaign. Your typical House campaign, I would say the vast majority of them can operate on a $500 budget and probably no more than
Because
1,000.
you're like confined to one town or even one
You know,
portion
one
of
or
one town.
two is probably a typical, or three. You get into the North Country, obviously. Senator Gendro in District 1, I don't know, she's 60 or more towns
Yeah.
because they're all very small.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, the whole of Coos County essentially has a similar population to the city of Concord,
Yeah.
which isn't even a whole Senate district. So
Yeah,
she's got all of that plus. And,
Yeah, I mean, some of the Senate districts are huge, like the one that I ran in, and there are some, like
you take
Howard,
for Senator Abbas, he has Salem and
one other town.
one
I
other
think.
or two other towns. I think
Yeah.
he has two other, actually.
Yeah.
But he has 3 communities he's working.
I just feel like there's a lot of face-to-face, a lot of communication with your constituents that just doesn't take place in a larger national campaign. It feels like
No.
that's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the one hand, there's more face-to-face, it's more personal and whatnot, but it also feels like running that type of campaign would be very exhausting. So.
It can be
Yeah.
tiring.
It was. Put a lot of mileage on my car.
Yes.
I had a great guy working with me, and when I was getting tired toward the end of the day, he said, "Nope, we got to see 10 or 12 more people." And so, he got to push you at the end and it was tough running in the primary against a lobbyist. That made it even harder for me. But it was quite an experience. I learned, like you said, I learned a lot from that. I learned that there were a lot of things in common with the places I had with people, but there were distinct differences too. It was, it was very interesting.
Well, I'll go back to, I touched on this a little bit earlier about the personal rewarding part of this. It really is.
Yeah.
You get to meet a lot of really great people. You do.
Yep.
We joked a little bit about you hear from the people that are most dissatisfied with a position or a vote you've taken. Well, that's certainly true. But I will say 90%, 95, 98, 99% of them are very respectful
Yep.
in how they approach you with that. And again, I enjoy the conversation because I like to learn why they feel that way. And I find it's a learning experience for me, and every day. But you get to meet just some really awesome people. And the Senate level, we get more constituent requests for assistance with issues too.
Right.
And sometimes they're not even within your towns, but they're someone who happens to be doing something, like with ED&A. I chair that committee, and we oversee professional licensure, and a lot of the retirement issues. So I may have someone that comes that's not in my particular district, but is having an issue within the purview of what I cover there.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
you're just able to help a lot of people, or at least get them so they can have the conversation with the right person.
right, and even as a state rep, you represent the entire state.
Yes.
And that's what people kind of forget. Say, well, you're not in my district. Well, but I can help you. I mean, I can still make an impact at the State House.
I've never said that to anyone ever, and I never will. If you
Right.
need some assistance and I'm
Yeah.
able
You're
to help
there.
you, then
Right.
I'll do my best.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Wow. You are really sucking this in, aren't you?
I'm-
It's like he's
I'm-
playing sponge tonight.
I am just not on today.
So that's one of two things. I'm either really intriguing him or I'm really boring. He's falling asleep.
That's absolutely not it.
He's had a tough week.
I've
He's
had a
very
tough week personally, and,
I'm sorry.
and so
Yeah.
death in the family.
Oh,
so
my
I'm just
condolences. I'm
not
sorry.
on tonight. That's all. That's all it is.
Well, it's a team effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anything that you can, that you think that you can get some help with from, the people that listen to the show. I mean, testifying is very important.
Yep.
And there's many ways to testify. You don't have to be there. You can send in an email and do it that way, or you can. So what would you suggest? Is it one or two things coming up, or is it too late
Sure.
in the cycle now?
Well, we're still hearing bills.
Yep.
I wouldn't say it may be too late in the cycle for certain bills. It depends
Right.
on what your area of interest is. But
Sure.
there's certainly a lot of important bills that are going through the legislature still. Again, with crossover, the bills that passed the Senate are now over in the House. So
Right.
your focus might have to be on
The
the
House
House
side.
versus the Senate, depending on what your what your area of interest or what the concern that you have is. But I would always tell people, pay attention. And we're in a much better place now than we were about ability for you, the people of New Hampshire, to be involved with what's going on in their government, because all of our hearings are live streamed and they're also recorded and they're available on YouTube. So, if you're working during the day and you're not able to make a hearing, you can still watch the hearing. You can still see what happened, what was said, and if there's information that you have that will help the committee, by all means, send that in by email, call me, call the reps, any of those things. They're very valuable ways. I personally love a good conversation. My preference is face-to-face. I'm a people person. I enjoy talking to people.
Right.
I enjoy a phone call. Emails, we're inundated with them. It's very difficult to read them all.
Yeah.
And I tell people that. I say, you're always welcome to email me, but if you're going to do it,
Call.
keep it as direct to the
Yeah.
point as you can. Try and really make your point in the first paragraph, because there's a good chance that may be all that I get through before I have to move on to the hundreds more that I have coming in.
A
So
lot of
there's-
folks would tend to want to explain things, right? And so you get a novel, right? Because they want to really make their point.
Yes.
And that I guess that's what you're saying is that
At least get my interest in the first paragraph. Get your point across.
So many that you can't.
Yes.
You just can't.
You can't read them all. It's impossible. So get your point across in the first paragraph, and then elaborate further. And if I need more detail, or whomever is reading it, we're free to read on. And I would say when you call or when you stop and talk to me, I certainly love to have a long conversation, but I don't always have time for that because there's a lot of demands for our time.
Sure.
And so just try.
So there's
make it to the point.
There's two bills. I'm not sure where they're going. One is the cannabis bill, and the other one is assisted suicide. So have they come to the Senate?
They are currently in the Senate. Cannabis
Okay.
Cannabis will be heard tomorrow afternoon in
Okay.
Judiciary. I am not certain where the assisted suicide bill is. That I don't know. That may
Yeah.
also be in judiciary. I'm not sure. Or it may be in HHS. I'm not sure on that one.
So I never understood this. How does Sherm or any Speaker of the House determine where the bill should go? Like, I was on a Veterans Committee. We got the craziest bills coming through us, had nothing to do with veterans. And I kept saying, okay, can you give us a bill that deal with veterans? That's the name of the committee. But how does that work? I never did find that out.
So there's guidelines generally, or at least general guidelines, as to the topic of what the bill is addressing. And it's a collaboration between the Speaker and the Clerk's office generally, or the Senate President and the Senate Clerk's office.
And the minority leader too, right? Or not?
Could be. Most of it is done, I believe, through the Speaker's office and with the Clerk's assistants, as to determine what would be the best committee or appropriate. Now, sometimes, like in ED&A in the Senate, we've had a few bills that really could have gone to judiciary. I don't know why I struggle with that word. To judiciary, but judiciary had such a heavy workload that they needed to move some of those bills into other committees, and that may be the case of what happened with you in the Veterans Committee, is that probably it could have gone to a different committee, but the workload was so heavy that they sometimes shift them out if they can find that there's at least some relative topic to something you might be able to work through. Obviously, sending a bill to a committee where that committee is used to that type of subject is hopefully the best path, because the committee members have some expertise within that area, or at least some experience in dealing with it and with the topic, and that's helpful in asking the right questions when you're doing a hearing, and that's certainly an important piece of it. But
You said earlier that all of the committee meetings are live streamed.
yes.
But you can have multiples going on simultaneously.
Yep.
Okay, so is there a website that someone goes to and there's just a list of meetings, or how would I find that if I'm going to
Sure.
to watch some committee hearings tomorrow?
General Court website, and there's links on the General Court, the New Hampshire General Court. It has all of these links to calendars, notifications, and they have a digital calendar which takes you to that. You can pick that committee, and it's much more interactive than the paper calendars that we have. They still have both. You can view the paper calendar version, in a PDF format, or you can go to the digital calendar, and there's links that you can go to these each particular hearing.
You have to define whether you want to go to the Senate or the House.
Correct. There's
So
sites
that's-
for both, but
yeah.
they're all under the New Hampshire General Court, and then it breaks down. You can pick the House or the Senate, and then you can look from there. And there's the links are there. I don't do it often enough that I can sit here and quote you exactly how to
Oh
get there.
no, I just wanted to because I mean I've watched full House sessions.
Sure,
live
that
streamed,
link is
and
also on there.
I was able to find that, but the idea that every single committee is now
Yes.
live streamed is
Yeah.
And those are recorded and they're available
So you can get back to 'em.
for a YouTube video. Well, I guess it's a YouTube video that you can go back and watch.
Yeah, that makes it unique too. I mean, the fact that you don't really have to be there.
It makes it more challenging being on the committee because you have to remember you're on camera all the time.
Yeah, that is
It's a little different aspect than when I started in the House.
we used to when that started happening. Gary used to have really appropriate comments during committee sessions, and so we would be able. We liked playing those back for our audience.
Yes.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah. We could probably do a whole
Gary
show.
Gary
on
would have
stuff.
outbursts, and it was simply hilarious to see the types of outbursts that he would have.
Gary was a very colorful character. He
Yeah.
certainly
And-
was. He
and
had
it
a
was-
great personality.
Yeah, and no one ever left to run into the ante-room when he went up to speak.
No,
So
gosh, no.
Where some of the other people, you saw the people walking toward the well, and you'd say, "Oh, let's go out in the back. This is going to be the same nonsense." Or
Right.
we've already talked. Not Gary though. You would always stay. Him and John Burt. Those
Yeah.
were the two that
Lively.
very
My
lively.
understanding is that both of them earned the reputation of the speaker or someone wanting to speak to them prior to their speeches. Hey, are you going to speak on this bill? Because if you're going to speak on it, then I'm not going to present it or something. I mean, John was asked that plenty of times.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
John, please don't get up there because
They both had a presence within the House.
They did. Yeah.
You know,
they
one of my
absolutely-
favorite memories of Gary is when you're doing a roll call vote in the House, you'd have that 30
Jeopardy.
seconds, and he would, all of a sudden you'd hear someone whistling the Jeopardy tune.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was Gary.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when he passed, I think the House did that.
Yeah.
There was a tribute to
Yeah,
him, yes.
and that's
The Speaker generally would try and quell it,
yeah, but he would let it
but
go.
he didn't that time.
Yeah,
Not at all.
Yeah, and even when Sherlock was there, you could see him grin sometimes when he
Absolutely.
when he
They
was
all
looking-
knew who was doing it. But they'd look around like they didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So you can, you know, honestly, to Howard's point, you also meet a lot of great people when you're in the State House, and not just people in your own party. You meet people from the other side.
The whole, across the whole state.
Some
Yeah.
of Gary's best stories were stories of his interactions with folks on the other side.
Oh, I'm sure.
And well, not in a
No, I'm teasing.
adversarial manner, but
No, no.
as in a
Yeah.
you know, like apparently he made a joke once about the average age and how close to death everybody in the house was, because there's a lot of old people.
Oh my goodness.
And no, I know what it was. It was. I think they were talking about one of the euthanasia bills, and he says, well, you know, given the average age of this body, shouldn't some of us have to recuse ourselves? And he
I
got
could see him saying that.
he got a speaking to by the
The Speaker.
by the speaker. I think it was Shurtleff at the time.
Sherlock, yeah.
And
Oh
he
my
said,
gosh.
hey, you know, so and so over here is dying of cancer. And she
Maybe
was
you
on-
shouldn't have said that,
She was
right?
on the other side of the aisle, right? And,
Oh, yeah.
and so Gary said, okay, and he immediately, no hesitation, went right up to her and said,
Apologized.
were you offended by that?
Yeah.
And she says, no, I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah,
Right? So,
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
these
But
things
not-
that we think people are going to be offended by, right?
But not
They
everyone.
take as humor, right? You always took Gary as humor.
Well,
and
you couldn't
sarcasm.
pull that off. Not anybody could pull that
Correct.
off.
Right, exactly.
Because he, you know, he looked through things a little differently, but he cared for people. And you know, that's kind of why we're still here, actually. I mean, because of you and Gary doing this show, we're trying to continue his legacy. And I want to, you know, publicly thank you for, you know, hanging out with me with this. I can never come up with the. I'm not quick-witted as Gary was, but sometimes I come up with something decent that people might smile at. But it's been.
I just want you for your Rolodex, Jim.
Well, that's true. You did say that to me. He said to me, "You
Did
have
you
a."
really?
Yeah, he
You
did.
really said
So here's what happened.
Over the years, I've gotten to know everybody at the State House, but I still don't have those,
said, "I don't- yeah."
extensive connections.
He said, "I could use you for your large Rolodex."
There you go.
That's hilarious.
Well, listen, Gary earned a lot of respect from members of the general court on both sides of the aisle in both bodies. He was very well respected.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
He knew how to compose himself appropriately, and he brought some humor.
Yeah, he made you think that he didn't know what he was doing. Like, he would be sitting there with his iPad when we were doing the bill, and he'd come running down to me, and he'd say, "How are we going to vote on this?" I said, "Why are you asking me?" He said, "I know you read everything. I don't. I'm going to ask you again. How are we going to vote on it?" I said, "Listen, you're the one I should be asking. How are you going to vote on this?"
Yeah.
But he would just do that to kind of break the ice
Sure.
with what was going on.
Sure.
You know, so that was fun.
It's always nice to have that one person that you.
Yeah, we had several of those people.
Well, you know, I've greatly increased my circle of friends. I've made friends with you and I.
Yeah.
We know each other because of politics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we've continued to know each other beyond politics.
Sure.
And I've many of those good relationships that I've just developed some really great friendships. And
Yeah.
increased my circle of contacts as well.
Sure.
But you know, in the thing I always remind people when we're putting on a hearing, especially one, you know, it may be a contentious subject like an animal cruelty bill or something like that. We talked about that earlier. And,
Yeah.
You know, I often remind everyone, listen, no one here is advocating for animal cruelty. Everyone here is advocating for the safe and fair treatment of animals. We just sometimes have different opinions and ideas of what that is. So I said, be mindful of that, be respectful of that in, you know, your actions and your comments. And we'll get through the hearing today, and everyone will have an opportunity to make their opinions known. And I try to run my hearings and give people the opportunity to be treated the way that I would like to be treated when I was sitting over there,
Sure.
because that's how I started.
Yeah, that's how we all started.
But it was
really.
testifying on bills, and,
Yep.
and I wanted to be treated that way and feel like what I, at
this-
least that I was heard.
Well, I think the coolest thing is when you'd have people who would take a day off from work to come and testify. Those were the people you would look at and say, they're really interested in what's
Absolutely.
and it's important to them. And you can, that's what I like the most about that position. You listen to these people, you learned a lot. And sometimes they actually changed your mind. Because you may have had a different point of view, which was totally opposite of that. But they sat there and explained it, and you
Yep.
said, you know what, you're right.
At very least, you learned something.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
So just because it popped into my head, you're absolutely right. The people who actually take a day off from work to go up there and testify, these people are lending their knowledge and expressing their passion for this subject one way or the other.
And giving their time. That's-
Are you able to distinguish between those? I mean, just someone steps up to the mic, okay, this guy took a day off from work, versus, oh, this person attended a seminar, is being paid to be here.
Yes,
Yes.
because on the sign-in sheets, you have to sign in, whether you're
Lobbyist.
a rep or a lobbyist or a senator or yourself. And, you can be.
Who are you
But
Who are you
all
representing?
of these people who claim that they're themselves, I mean, these could be regular citizens that, like Columbia University, the sit-in, the camp-in or whatever they're doing. Have you seen a picture of it?
Yes. They're not
Every
all
s-
students.
Every single tent
They're not all.
is identical.
Yeah.
As though they were all bought in the same store at the same time by the same person. They're all being paid, but they are students, right? They're all individual students who are protesting, and that's what I'm like.
That's a little
Do
different,
you
I
see
think.
those people come through? That they have been kind of coached into being here.
Sure, absolutely. And, the committee will usually understand that and ferret it out. And you do your best as a committee chair to try and provide an open and balanced argument for the committee. And I generally will mix in the people that I call to the stand next by what they indicate their position is, so that you're not getting all those opposed first, all
Like
those
every other one you try to do, or every third
at least
one,
some,
or whatever.
at least some mix. And some of these folks I know from enough times of being there that I'm able to figure out the right order to put them in to sort of present the committee with the information they need to make a good decision. That's my goal